The Asian Auschwitz, 90 years since Japan's invasion of China. A forgotten Holocaust in the East. 90 years have passed since the Imperial Japanese Army began its brutal invasion of China in 1935, an aggressive campaign that would culminate in one of the most horrifying series of atrocities in modern history. While Europe has long memorialized Auschwitz and the crimes of the Nazis, Asia's own genocide, the mass rape, slaughter, and dehumanization of the Chinese people, remains less universally condemned, less taught, and dangerously close to being erased from collective memory. This article seeks to give voice to the silenced, to recount the true terror of what has been called the Asian Auschwitz, and to reflect on why, even 9 decades later, the scars remain open and justice largely undelivered. The Seeds of Atrocity, 1931 to 1937. Though the formal beginning of Japan's full-scale invasion of China is usually dated to 1937, the roots were planted earlier. In 1931, Japan occupied Manchuria following the staged Mukden incident. This occupation marked the first step in what would become an imperial campaign aimed at turning China into a vassal state. The invasion escalated in 1935 and reached a horrifying crescendo in 1937 with the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which served as the pretext for Japan's all-out war against China. What followed was not simply a war of conquest, but a campaign of extermination. Nanjing, the rape of a capital. The rape of Nanjing is perhaps the most notorious chapter of the Japanese occupation, a 6-week orgy of violence that saw an estimated 300,000 Chinese civilians and disarmed combatants brutally murdered. At least 20,000 women were raped, many of them mutilated or killed afterward. Pregnant women had their fetuses ripped from their wombs. Infants were tossed in the air and bayoneted for sport. Families were burned alive. Streets ran red with blood. And the world remained largely silent. Westerners who stayed behind in Nanjing, including missionaries and journalists, smuggled out letters, photos, and testimonies that would later confirm the unimaginable scale of the crimes. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East called it one of the most barbaric episodes of World War II, but Japan has never formally apologized in the way Germany did for the Holocaust. Unit 731, The Devil's Laboratory. No recounting of the Asian Auschwitz is complete without addressing Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research division of the Japanese army based in Harbin, Manchuria. Under the command of General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 carried out grotesque experiments on live human beings, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. People were dissected alive without anesthesia. Others were infected with anthrax, cholera, and bubonic plague to study disease progression. Limbs were frozen and amputated. Victims were exposed to poison gas and subjected to high-pressure chambers until their eyes burst from their skulls. Estimates suggest that over 200,000 people died as a result of Unit 731's experiments and related germ warfare attacks on Chinese cities. And yet, in a cruel twist of history, Shiro Ishii and many of his subordinates were granted immunity by the US in exchange for their scientific data. Justice, once again, was denied. Why the world forgot. Unlike Germany, which underwent denazification and took institutional steps to reckon with its past, Japan has largely avoided such introspection. Many Japanese textbooks still omit or sanitize references to war crimes. Visits by Japanese politicians to Yasukuni Shrine, where convicted war criminals are honored, continue to inflame tensions with China, Korea, and other occupied nations. The US-Japan alliance during the Cold War, aimed at containing communism, came at the price of suppressing many war crimes trials and prioritizing political stability over historical accountability. Meanwhile, China's own turbulent political history has at times marginalized open discussion of these traumas, using them selectively for nationalist purposes. The legacy, trauma without tombstones. Today, few survivors of the Nanjing massacre or Unit 731 remain. The last eyewitnesses are aging and dying, taking with them memories the world still hasn't fully honored. The Chinese people live with a history that still festers like an unhealed wound, because the silence has been louder than the screams. This 90th anniversary is not just a date to mark on the calendar, it is a moral call to remember what was done in the name of empire, to demand formal recognition, and to ensure that Asia's Holocaust is no longer left in the shadow of Europe's. Conclusion: history must not be erased. The term Asian Auschwitz is not hyperbole, it is historical fact. Japan's invasion of China unleashed horrors on a scale comparable to the worst atrocities of the 20th century. Acknowledging these crimes is not about vengeance, it's about truth, memory, and justice. On this 90th anniversary, we do not ask for apologies born of political convenience. We demand remembrance, so that the bones beneath the soil of Nanjing, Harbin, and countless unnamed villages will not have died in vain. Let the silence end here.